Agrobiodiversity Conference. If you missed the opening ceremony, it was amazing. A lot of very high-level talks from the partners of the conference and ministerial people from the Italian institutions. And so please watch them recorded if you have a chance, because it was really very, very rich. Now on this session, we want to understand where we come from. We've had, this is the second Agrobiodiversity Conference, and it has been a journey since the first one that took place in India in 2016. A journey that where a lot of things happen, and most relevant, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are here with a very high-level group of people to really understand where we come from. The first conference in India resulted into a very significant daily declaration, which was a well-thought document about what was discussed during the first Congress. And that was very much a scientific conference where the state-of-the-art conversation around agrobiodiversity were presented. In this conference, and also following a little bit what has happened during this year, including the UN Food System Summit and what happened in the previous year, including the COVID pandemic, we were thinking of having a little bit of a different structure so that other stakeholders, not only the research community, could intervene and integrate their ideas into a rich and fuller debate. In fact, agrobiodiversity is not only about the research and the science, but it's really about its use and having the agrobiodiversity in production system so that production system can become more nature positive. So we created a coalition and we transformed the concept of the daily post-Congress declaration into what we now call the Manifesto of Rome. The manifesto anticipates and announced the Congress to give a very diverse group of stakeholders a more familiar, although still perfectible, definition of agrobiodiversity. And together with the definition, to have the opportunity to set the discussion towards concrete commitments that can help safeguard its value in consumption, production, and conservation. These are the three pillars of the conference. And finally, we also want to project the result of this conference into the future, and where the action, we want to monitor what happens over time in terms of the agrobiodiversity. And so where are we going to go? And in a few years, we will hopefully have the opportunity to meet again and assess where we are in terms of the implementation of an agrobiodiversity agenda. This may happen in China, and so we want to understand where are we in terms of the agrobiodiversity. So in this Congress, I have the honor of having very high-level speakers. There will be a Q&A session, and don't miss the opportunity really to participate and to send questions, because it's not easy and it doesn't happen often to have such high-level group of people to answer your questions around agrobiodiversity. So we have Raj Paroda, who will be the first speaker. And he will highlight what happened during the first Congress. He was one of the major organizers of that conference. Dr. Mohapatra, the Director General of ICAR, and he will help us rediscovering the teaching of the Daily Declaration. Hao Wayping from the CAS, the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Science, he is the one leading us to the future and towards what would be the possible third Congress, and so where the conversation can lead. And finally, we have Ken Nadozie, who is the Secretary of the International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, and he will help us understand how the current Congress responds to the need to integrate agrobiodiversity into food system transformation as a key ingredient to ensure that agrobiodiversity is part of a nature positive context and production system. Finally, I will retake the floor and I will speak about the Raw Manifesto and introducing what the Raw Manifesto is about. Now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Paroda. Probably none of the speakers here needs an introduction, but Dr. Paroda is the president of the Indian Society of Plant Genetic Resources. He's a former Director General of the Indian Council of Agricultural Research and Secretary, Department of Agricultural Research and Education. And so he has a unique perspective as an accomplished and very experienced scientist on understanding the issues related to agrobiodiversity. He is well known for the modernization and strengthening of the natural agricultural research system in India, and he also helped many other countries to achieve the same. Government of India has recognized his contribution to the advancement of agriculture by bestowing on him prestigious National Padma Bhushan Award, which is then complemented by many other awards that he received over his career. He also served as president of the Indian Science Congress and president of the National Academy of Agricultural Sciences. He has received like 19 honoris causa doctorate from 19 universities, including not only from India, but also from Ohio State University, Indian Agricultural Research Institute. And of course, he is a member of many societies, honorary member, for example, of American Society of Crop Science, American Society of Agronomy. I think those words do not make justice to the curricula of Dr. Paroda, but just to frame his level. And I now leave the floor for him to talk. Thank you very much.
Dear delegates and organizers of the second International Agrobiodiversity Congress, a very warm welcome from India to you all. We all know the importance of agrobiodiversity for human existence and welfare, which does not need any emphasis. At the group, we are blessed with rich agrobiodiversity, be it of microorganisms, insects, plants, trees, or animals. Not only we have these rich genetic resources since antiquity, but need to take care of these rich natural resources for posterity and study them scientifically for our use. Realizing the need to have a common platform to have scientific deliberations on aspects relating to collection, evaluation, genetic enhancement through use, conservation, and exchange, the Indian Society of Plant Genetic Resources in 2016 decided to hold the first International Agrobiodiversity Congress, since no such platform was earlier existing. The Congress was inaugurated by Honorable Prime Minister of India and was attended by about 1,000 delegates from more than 60 countries. The Congress was also having the presence of Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, Dr. N. Pittwiller, that time the Director General of Biodiversity International, Dr. Peter Evan, Dr. Gurdev Kush, Dr. Kamal Bawa, Dr. Sequel Sat, Dr. Ed Southern, besides many World Food awardees who also had participated and were honored by the Honorable Prime Minister in the inaugural session for their scientific contributions. More than 20 gene bank managers also participated and discussed issues relating to efficient ways to conserve and use the genetic resources being held in their gene banks. In the plenary, the Congress endorsed Delhi Declaration on Agrobiodiversity Management, which has been used as a roadmap for research and development of genetic resources, and also for their taking advantage for both and abiotic stress tolerances, including the tolerance to climate change. It was also decided to have a continuing committee to ensure holding of the second International Agrobiodiversity Congress under the then Director General Dr. Ann Twittwiller, and now being looked after under the leadership of Dr. Johan Lucas Restrepo. We are indeed happy to see the realization of the second IAC with possibilities of subsequent ones to be held in future. It is a pleasure for Indian Society of Plant Genetic Resources to be associated with the second IAC, and we wish this Congress a grand success. Namaste from India, and please have a glimpse of the events relating to the first IAC so that you know what happened at that time, which many of you possibly could not attend.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paroda, for your inspiring words and for showing us nice pictures of the first Agrobiodiversity Congress, which obviously was very different from this one because many people could attend in that occasion. I now have the honor of and privilege to introduce Dr. Trilokan Mohapatra. He is the secretary, he is the Director General of the India Council of Agricultural Research. He is secretary for the Department of Agricultural Research and Education as well. And he's, as we all know, a very renowned scientist. He's specialized on genomics and pioneer molecular breeding. He has experience of guiding agricultural research and education as a director and vice chancellor, Indian Agricultural Research Institute in New Delhi. And as a director before, he was leading the National Rice Research Institute. And presently, he's providing leadership to agricultural research and education system in India, responsible for policy formulation and implementation, knowledge management, and human resource development. He has contributed by sharing his vision to gear up sustainable agricultural production in South Asia countries and transforming livelihoods in South Asia. His scientific production is huge. He has more than 232 research articles in prominent scientific journals, book chapters, and policy documents. And he has received 10 doctoral degrees honoris causa by more than 10 universities for his contribution in agricultural science. And so Dr. Mohapatra obviously is linked to many societies, the president of the National Academy of Agricultural Science in New Delhi, and provide leadership to other societies, including the Indian Society of Genetics and Plant Breeding, also in New Delhi, Indian Society for Oilseeds Research in Hyderabad, and the Indian Society for Agricultural Statistics in New Delhi. Dr. Mohapatra, the floor is yours.
Dear delegates of the Second International Agrobiodiversity Congress, greetings, namaste from India. You all know that the first International Agrobiodiversity Congress was held at New Delhi in the year 2016. And the deliberations in this Congress led to recommendations, which is now known as Delhi Declaration. Delhi Declaration has 10 recommendations, and we all know that. India took note of all the recommendations, did brainstorming in the year 2017, identified specific action points, and initiated action in each of those. The Delhi Declaration called for several actions and particularly emphasized on strengthening our activity on agrobiodiversity conservation and sustainable use of agrobiodiversity for achieving the goals as outlined as a sustainable development and also the Aichi targets. The Indian government has laid emphasis on this for a long time and established institutions which are known as national bureaus on plants, animals, fishes, insects, and microbes. And through these bureau activities, the germplasm, agrobiodiversity in various forms are conserved and also utilized sustainably for meeting the sustainable development goals. For instance, in case of animals, after Delhi Declaration and its action point defined, India has identified more than 50 new breeds of animals and also conserved 49 native breeds using semen. 240,000 semen doses have been conserved. Similarly, by use of somatic cells, DNA, and also through in situ conservation, in a complementary mode, the agrobiodiversity is being conserved for future. Not only in animal, but also in plants, more than 450,000 germplasm, stored in the form of seeds in the gene bank, and similarly the complementary systems of conservation are being followed. Similar situation also is existing in case of fish species, in case of insects, and also in case of agriculturally important microbes, where more than 7,000 well-characterized microbial resources are conserved, and for each one of them traits are known and which are being utilized for sustainable agricultural production systems. We also register germplasm lines which are having unique traits after thorough characterization. We continue to focus on crop wild relatives as it was asked for in the Delhi Declaration, and our prioritization has led to collection of large number of crop wild relatives. And in fact, post 2016, there is 30% increase in our collections with regard to crops crop wild relatives. Delhi Declaration recognized the role of rural communities and emphasized on developing legal and institutional and funding mechanisms to support those activities of rural communities. India has 550 tribal communities, 227 ethnic groups, and also more than 5,000 forest villages. Keeping this in mind, and keeping in mind their very significant contributions to conservation of germplasm resources, a sui generis mechanism has been put in place in the form of protection of plant varieties and farmer rights authority. And through this authority, the farmers are being recognized. They are also being rewarded. More than 10,000 farmers' right applications have been received, and more than 2,000 of them have been already recognized with due certification. And this is something which is unique, and rewarding farmers for their conservation activities, particularly individual farmers as well as community of farmers. This is a unique activity, and that is going on very successfully in this country. We keep emphasizing on use of modern tools in characterization of agrobiodiversity and also their utilization. Whole genome sequencing is happening in regard to crops, fish, insects, animals, microbes, as well as pathogens. And simultaneously, this information is being utilized to develop DNA chips. For instance, DNA chips in cattle, buffalo, goat, chicken, and camel have been developed, which are quite highly dense. And these chips are being utilized to identify new genes and new traits, and use them in also breeding programs. The breeding populations are also being sequenced, characterized, and being utilized to develop new crop cultivars. Similarly, in case of fishes, fish omics is going on, and in case of animal species, there are various activities which are going on, and these are being strengthened. Post 2016, whole lot of new genomes being sequenced and characterized. And increased funding also has happened through the process of building kind of consortia approach in genomics. Delhi Declaration emphasized on facilitating global exchange of germplasm resources, which are important for food and agriculture, and through adopting multilateral, also bilateral instruments. And India has actually utilized these instruments for the purpose of exchange. For instance, recently, through a collaborative effort with the Kirkhout Trust of UK, more than 200 accessions have been supplied to 10 different African countries. They have been shared, particularly in pulses, for the purpose of various application, evaluation, followed by application in African countries. We also are crystallizing and fine-tuning the policy and procedure related to ABS through stakeholder consultations involving various organizations, institutions, and individuals, so that harmonized laws are in place for future. Studies are also being undertaken with regard to invasive alien species in the country. Every year, 100,000 to 150,000 plant germplasm accessions are being exchanged. Those are being quarantined, and in the process, the threatening diseases are being controlled and addressed. The capacity development in the area has been our focus for a long time. We have designed MSc and PhD programs specifically to deal with plant genetic resources. And in addition to that, we also conduct periodic trainings. More importantly, the social media is being utilized elaborately to adequately create awareness among all concerned. Government schemes are also being mainstreamed for dealing with conservation and use aspects of agrobiodiversity. Agrobiodiversity index being worked out together with the Biodiversity International and State Alliance, and the work is in progress, and the investment is increasing through consortia research platforms. Mega programs have been initiated post 2016, which are addressing not only characterization but also trait discovery, use of genomics, and development of new crop cultivars in the process. Germplasm resource for food and agriculture remains important for India. The Indian Council of Agriculture Research has taken note of this. We strongly believe that we must balance the community rights and commercial use of these resources. We are open to private and global partnerships. And in fact, we have been building partnerships in the past, and we continue building such partnerships in future. We are not only the custodians of genetic resources, we are also responsible for their future availability and sustainable use. I take this opportunity to wish all the very best to the Agrobiodiversity Congress 2021. We support the commitments which have been made in the form of Rome Manifesto. I thank you all for your patient hearing.
He's muted. He's muted. He's muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Mohapatra, for your inspiring words and reminding us of the importance of agrobiodiversity, and particularly the role of farmers as custodian of a large portion of it. I would now like to introduce the next speaker, Dr. Wayping Howe. He is a Deputy Director General at the Department of International Cooperation of the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Science. He got a PhD in Agricultural Water Resources Management from Graduate School of the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Science. He was the Director of Dryland Farming Research Department of the Institute of Environment and Sustainable Development in Agriculture, always with the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Science. And his research interests focus on efficient use of water resources, land and water management. Since 2011, Dr. Howe has served as director of the Key Laboratory of Dryland Agriculture of the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. He has led or participated in 30 international and national research projects on soil and water resources management in arid regions of China, published more than 90 peer-reviewed scientific papers. Dr. Howe, the floor is yours.
Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is my honor to be invited to attend the second International Agrobiodiversity Congress held online. Against the raging COVID-19 pandemic, the opening of this Congress shows the great value attached by the international community to agricultural biodiversity. On behalf of the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences, that is CAS, I wish to take the opportunity to express my warm congratulations on the convening of the Congress. Agricultural biodiversity lays the material foundation for human survival and has a bearing on global food system transformation, nutrition, and health, and the sustainable socio-economic development. However, the world is facing enormous challenges brought by the serious loss of agricultural biodiversity, aggravation of climate change, and increasing vulnerability of food system. China is a major agricultural country with rich agricultural biodiversity and is home to tens of thousands of diverse cultivated plants, poultry, livestock, fish, and microorganisms. China has conserved over 1 million collections of agricultural germplasm resources, which include 520,000 collections of crop germplasm resources. China has established a system of protection that combines germplasm bags and sites for in situ conservation. The Chinese government has included the protection of agricultural germplasm resources and facility construction in the outline of 14th Five-Year Plan 2021 to 2025 for national economic and social development, and will further increase investment in the conservation and sustainable use of agricultural biodiversity. As a national agricultural research organization, CAS hosts research teams and conservation facilities for crop, poultry, livestock, and microbial germplasm resources. CAS has just finished building a national crop germplasm bank with a capacity of 1 million collections. And according to our plan, we are going to build germplasm bank for poultry, livestock, and microorganisms in the near future. With stronger conservation capacity, CAS will play a bigger role in organizing and coordinating national efforts in agricultural biodiversity conservation and use. The International Agricultural Biodiversity Congress will provide a platform for exchange among scientists, policymakers, and non-governmental organizations engaged in the conservation and the use of agricultural biodiversity from different countries and fields to share scientific research achievement and practical experience related to production, consumption, and protection. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks to the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, the allies between Biodiversity International and the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, for hosting this International Agrobiodiversity Congress. It is a great honor for CAS to be a partner of this important event. CAS looks forward to fruitful outcomes of the Congress and will continue its support for the further development of the International Agrobiodiversity Congress. Last, I wish the Congress complete success. I wish you all good health. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Howe, for your inspiring word and highlighting the importance of the agrobiodiversity, and particularly vis-a-vis climate change and the vulnerability that the combination of loss of agrobiodiversity and climate change can bring to farmer community. And I would like to give the floor to Dr. Ken Nadozie. He's the Secretary of the FAO International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. Over the last 2 decades, Mr. Nadozie had worked on legal policy matters and intergovernmental processes with both the International Treaty and FAO's Commission for Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. Before joining FAO, Mr. Nadose was in private legal practice and academic research. A lawyer by training, Mr. Nadose holds a doctorate in law from McGill University, Montreal, in Canada, with a focus on international relations and international legal issues related to genetic resources. Mr. Nadose also has a master's degree in business administration, MBA, and a bachelor's degree in law. And because of his privileged position as negotiating and overseeing how countries are managing, conserving, and use agrobiodiversity, he's in the best position to give us highlights. Thank you, Mr. Nadose. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello for this. Let me start by welcoming everybody to this Congress. Colleagues, participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank the government of Italy and Alliance of Biodiversity International and SIAT for organizing and hosting this event. As you all have heard from previous speakers who have highlighted the fact that biodiversity loss, climate change, land degradation, malnutrition, poverty, food insecurity threaten the long-term viability and well-being of humanity and our planet. We have to change direction or reverse our current unsustainable trajectory to make more positive impacts on our climate, on our planet. And to improve the sustainability of agriculture and food systems, it is critical to reduce their pressure on natural resources and their negative environmental impacts, including in relation to climate change, biodiversity, water, and land. If our food production systems are to reduce the negative impacts on biodiversity and climate change, we must tap into the full potentials of agrobiodiversity. Agrobiodiversity is the building block for the diversification of food production systems and form the basis upon which our future food security relies. While agrobiodiversity is not the only component required for a sustainable food system, a sustainable food system cannot exist without agrobiodiversity. And the more agrobiodiversity we use, the more we are able to conserve. It has emerged as a vehicle for providing nutritious food through natural processes, and it is critical to achieving the number of the SDGs. Using agrobiodiversity sustainably is a pathway to its conservation. And it has helped us to stabilize food production, create jobs, secure the livelihoods of smallholder farmers, many of them women who produce about 80% of the world's food. I would like to use the opportunity at this point to express gratitude to the contributions of indigenous communities and small-scale family farmers, upon whom most of the world population depends for food and nutrition. They are collectively the guardians of the genetic diversity that feed and upon which all humans depend for survival. So back to the event of today, we are here to discuss actionable solutions for consumption, production, and conservation of agrobiodiversity. We must work and act together to protect and promote our agrobiodiversity. So holistic and innovative approaches are therefore needed. So the current Congress responds to the need to integrate agrobiodiversity into food systems transformation. It will address the research and policy dimensions of agrobiodiversity and its relevance to the diversification of food production systems. This Congress will focus on the critical components of the diets of billions of people globally. Research projects in different parts of the world illustrate how to create stronger links in the food value chain via agrobiodiversity and technology transfer in order to facilitate food systems transformation that we need and want. Therefore, the Congress has brought together more than 130 speakers and moderators from all over the world. It has convened experts and representatives from across the food system to explore and advance scientific research, nature-based solutions, policies, and practices to transform agriculture and diets through the use and conservation of agrobiodiversity. In this sense, preserving agrobiodiversity is essential to maintaining and restoring productive ecosystems, food security, sustainable economic development, and protecting traditional food cultures. So the three Congress commitments to agrobiodiversity, that's eat, consumption, grow, production, and save, conservation, are aligned to FAO's strategic framework through the transformation of agri-food systems that are more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable for the four betters that forms the basis of FAO's strategic approach, which is better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life. The Secretariat of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources, for which I am the secretary, is one of the main partners of this Congress. And the International Treaty is facilitating the access to genetic material of over 64 crops in its multilateral system for research, breeding, and training for food and agriculture. And it helps maximize the use and breeding of all crops and promotes development and maintenance of diverse farming systems. The treaty also recognizes the enormous contributions farmers have made to the ongoing development of the world's wealth of plant genetic resources. It calls for protecting the traditional knowledge of farmers, increasing their participation in national decision-making processes, and ensuring that they share in the benefits from the use of these resources. Essentially, it provides a holistic and pluralistic approach to PGRFA conservation and use, promoting the coexistence of different food production systems at different scales, while enhancing the participation of different communities of actors. It's, in other words, the Congress that we have today reflects in a whole lot of ways the objectives and aims of the International Treaty. That is why we have, and we are supporting it wholeheartedly. So we look forward to a very fruitful Congress. There's going to be very rich conversations, discussions, debates, and presentations. So I look forward to interacting with all of you and wish you a very successful and enjoyable meeting. Thank you, Carlo.
Thank you, Kent, for your very inspiring words and reminding again the importance of having the farmers and as part of the actor in agrobiodiversity to enhance resilience of production systems and to adopt a holistic and pluralistic approach for food production. So I think now we are, our speakers have presented their case and made their statement. I would like now to share with you some insights on the Rome Declaration and what is included in there. Let me share my screen. Is it visible? It's coming. Thank you very much. So that is the opening page is about the Second International Agrobiodiversity Congress. And as part of that, we have developed a Raw Manifesto, which is in line to what was introduced by Kent. So the Rom Manifesto sets out 3 urgently needed commitments to help tackle global challenges, including climate change, malnutrition, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation. We all know that it's important to consume diverse foods in diets that are nutritious, sustainable, affordable, acceptable, safe, and accessible to all. And that has very significant challenges. It's important that we produce food in diverse, resilient, and sustainable food system. And it's important that we conserve the agrobiodiversity that makes possible for people to produce in a diverse, resilient, and sustainable food system, as well as in consuming diverse foods in diets. If that diversity is not available through conservation, it may not be available even for the future generation. And the Raw Manifesto builds on the daily declaration and is the result of several months of discussion and inputs from partners of the Second International Agrobiodiversity Conference. So the 2021 Raw Manifesto, using agrobiodiversity to transform food systems, set out 3 urgently needed commitments to help tackle global challenges, including climate change, malnutrition, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation, through 3 major pillars, which were the ones that were mentioned before: consume diverse food, produce food in diverse, resilient, and sustainable food system, and conserve agrobiodiversity to give people the options they need to sustainably and inclusively transform food system and improve lives, both now and in the future. Now, this comes from the consideration of the significant impact on the environment that the modern agricultural system has. Current agricultural practices account for 70% of all freshwater use. They contribute to 1/3 of the anthropogenic global greenhouse gas emissions, and they are a major driver of biodiversity loss. In addition to that, and that's for the environment, so not only the loss of agrobiodiversity, but also the impact on the biodiversity at large by clearing environment, destroying landscapes and forests, and creating space for more agricultural land, and detrimental to the conservation of the natural environment. Not only that, also our food system are failing to provide the nutrients we need. More or less half of the global population is affected by some kind of form related to inappropriate diets. 2.37 billion people do not have access to adequate food, which is unfortunately an increase of 320 million people in a single year. And obviously the pandemic of COVID-19 made this much contribute to worsen the situation. As well, more people are living in poverty, actually an increase of 150 million people that are poor compared to the previous year by the end of 2021. And then there is also the people who are consuming and eating too much, which creates obesity and other kind of challenges related to diets. So the conference and the declaration wants to address those aspects by promoting 3 major actions for each of the 3 pillars. So for the consume part, the action that we are asking the partners and the other stakeholders to take is to strengthen efforts to build knowledge about the nutrient content of the thousands of different plant and animal species that can be used for food. We say that this agrobiodiversity, the neglected species, they all have a kind of, they can contribute to improve diets, but we need more research on that. And this is particularly important for the vulnerable groups, such as the infants, because they need adequate nutrition to grow healthy and to become lifelong and healthy adults. We also want to increase consumer awareness on why healthy, diverse diets matter, and devise policy interventions that stimulate the sustainability, accessibility of diverse food. We need to improve nutrition literacy programs that target particularly primary caregivers and the voluntary adoption of dietary and other nutrition-related behaviors conducing to health and well-being. So education will become very important in ensuring that people can consume better diets. And finally, we want to celebrate and integrate different cuisines, food cultures, and traditions from around the world into locally adapted nutrition strategies that make healthy, diverse diets acceptable to all. In fact, we tend to homogenize diets. We tend to eat very few crops, which are becoming more and more widespread across the continents. And we forget that food is not only what we eat and the calories, it's also the pleasure and the culture which is linked to it, the culture of the indigenous people, the traditional knowledge of the people. And of course, in each of these culture, traditionally, there is this cultural heritage and tradition. There is the use of different crops that can really help addressing the malnutrition crisis. The second set of action is on the produce. So we want to ensure that the use of agrobiodiversity to support productive and resilient agricultural ecosystem and increase knowledge about its benefit. It's important that, for example, when we plant different species and varieties of crops together, this can reduce pests and diseases damage, and it can therefore increase yields, boost farmers' income, but also diminish the damage that is done to the environment. And yet there is a big knowledge gap on how that can be done for thousands of species, breeds, strains, and varieties that remain largely overlooked by agricultural research and development efforts. So there should be an effort to increase the knowledge, including by building the traditional and indigenous knowledge around those crops, because for science to significantly contribute to that, it will take a long time that we don't have. So integrating the traditional knowledge will be a very important step to ensure that agrobiodiversity is more used. But we also need to create incentives and markets for diversified production. Markets for diverse food products are essential to stimulate sustainable production through increased consumer demand. The farmers of the world, the 500 million smallholder farmers of the world, they want to be linked to the market. They want agrobiodiversity to contribute to their livelihood. And they want, but they also want to keep using those crops because they know that those crops are important for the resilience and the sustainability of the system. Markets tend to homogenize, and that's why diets are homogenized. So how can we diversify markets and create job opportunities, income opportunities, particularly for young people and women? How can we foster rural entrepreneurship so that those communities that are the custodian of that diversity can also benefit from them in economic terms? And finally, we want to increase access to and exchange of quality reproductive material through resilient and efficient systems that meet indigenous people and rural producer needs and build capacity in using sustainable management practices. That is a very important element, and the reference to the indigenous people is really important because the indigenous people have a very wealth of knowledge, particularly linked to resilience and management strategy. So it's important that we develop community-based approach to make sure that the diversity is available to those communities in good quality and good quantity, such as, for example, community seed bank or strengthening local seed system, maybe promoting open source approaches. In general, really working on participatory action research that makes the farmers, the indigenous people, and the communities at the center of their development actions. It's important that government and policies that facilitate the registration of seed varieties, local breeds and strains, and ensure market access for traditional locally adapted varieties are in place, because otherwise it will be hard for the people to benefit from it. The third pillar is conserve. It's important, and again, we have three actions. It's important that we expand and better support ex situ conservation efforts. There is a lot of diversity that is not conserved. It's important that there is a kind of two-flow movement of genetic material from the gene bank to the farmers, and then back to from the farmers to the gene bank. Because the challenges are now, but there will be other challenges in the future as well. So collections need appropriate legal and institutional and funding mechanism to operate sustainably in the long term. It's important that it expand the amount of crops that is conserved ex situ is expanded, that there is critical funding to better characterize the genetic diversity that is currently held in collections, including through molecular characterization approach, so that indigenous people, farmers, breeders, and researchers can access the genetic diversity they need and when they need it. And it's also important that this is linked to the local community seed banks and the national system to really ensure that there is a coordinating efforts to manage this ex situ in situ integration. Expand and better support in situ and on-farm conservation efforts. That's also a very important because in order to conserve agrobiodiversity in situ and on farm, you need to diversify those production systems. And so you need to include in this action farms, livestock, agroforestry, aquatic areas, and make sure that they include species, breeds, strains, and varieties that are well adapted to the local condition and are part of the tradition of the local communities and the indigenous people. This agrobiodiversity, as we know, is often maintained for home consumption or cultural reasons, but it's important so to recognize the role of these communities to conserve and as was mentioned before, to also link to the market and try to, for some of these species and crops, to make sure that while maintaining the traditional species, breeds, strains, and varieties, that market value is also added. And that leads us to the third action of the conservation pillar, which is conserved through marketing and use, and ensure that benefits arising from its use are fair and equitable. So market incentives, public incentive, for example, through the payment for conservation services, are critically important to make sure that there is strong incentives by the farmers, the pastoralists, the fisherfolk, the indigenous people to conserve the agrobiodiversity. This was the effort of a number of partners, as it is indicated here. As you can see, they are very diverse, from national Italian institution, international organization, the UN system, environmental NGO like WWF, GFAR, IFA, the FAO, the International Treaty. It's a long list, and I will and it was great really to see all these partners aligning into the development of a document that will set the agenda for the agrobiodiversity for the years to come. Thank you very much. So I think now we are done with the presentations, and it's time to give the floor to the participants for their own questions. So let me start with some of the questions. Sorry, I need to. So the first question is about climate change. So climate change indeed affects sustainability. It affects food production, seed and crop production. This question comes from Vietnam. And so in Vietnam, the smallholder farmers suffered from extreme rain and were not able to manage seedling emergence. So how can, sorry, I cannot. So the question is, sorry, I don't find, it's difficult for me to read on the, suffer from extreme rain and were not able to manage seedling emergence, which have not been present for the past decade. So how can we combine well dealing with climate change and success of seed and crop production for farmers, especially for remote regions and vulnerable communities? And I would like to address this question to Dr. Mohapatra, because he talked a lot about the importance of the farmers' communities and the integration of the genetic resources to the farmers' community. Dr. Mohapatra.
Mute.
Can you please unmute?
You have to.
Yeah, thank you very much. In the context of global climate change, as it was mentioned, the role of germplasm would remain very, very crucial and important. Germplasms, as we are doing in India and elsewhere, can be used very elaborately for trade discovery. We have not been able to use even at a global scale, a huge percentage of our germplasm resources, which are conserved ex situ, or even which are available with the farmers in our crop breeding programs to combine yield, nutrition traits, and climate resilience. So this should be crucial. When we say that we would like to conserve and produce and consume, the production step would essentially require discovering traits in the germplasm and then effectively utilizing those traits in the low productive lines in the traditional varieties into high productive ones and transferring them using newer tools. So I believe there is a tremendous scope. Many countries are doing, and we should be able to do that. So that should be the focus, and every country has to have major programs on use of germplasm for building climate resilience. We have recently developed varieties in wheat, for instance, resistant to 7 different foliar diseases, including high yield. They are all put in high yield in the ground. Also, the biofortified traits like high zinc and protein. So this is what, in brief, I would like to say. I can keep on elaborating, but there is tremendous potential to do that, and there is a need to do that. We have opportunity to do that and expertise to do that. We should build networks at the global scale to actually do that with special funding.
Thank you, Dr. Mohapatra. The second question comes from Samuel. Is there a chance that conservation of agrobiodiversity and diversity of endangered species are competing with each other? And if this is true, what could be the solutions to make this, to make sure that this is reduced to the minimum? So here the question is, how can we minimize the damage that bioproduction system make to the natural environment, and how then agrobiodiversity? I would like to ask this question to Dr. Howe, given his background. And Dr. Howe.
Excuse me? Is it for me, the question?
Yeah, the question is, how can agrobiodiversity, I mean, there is a chance that the conservation of agrobiodiversity and the diversity of the endangered species are competing with each other. We've heard that our production systems are detrimental to the biodiversity and a major contribution of species extinction. So what could be a solution to reduce the impact on the extinction of the species by using agrobiodiversity and making production system more sustainable?
You know, I'm not the expert in these questions, but I can talk some parts about this. First, there will be some special species which is going to extinct, where competing with other species under the under the conservation. So I think first, my point of view is we should use the ex situ conservation. like your gene back construction, try to saving and conserve the species will be which they're going to be extinct. The second, we should keep the in situ conservation for this species at the small scales. Try to do some work to keep it survive in the in situ. So this is this combination can to keep the species which is going to extinct. This is just my point of view.
Thank you very much. And maybe to that, I would also like to add that, you know, by creating agroforestry system or system with multiple species, you can also create habitats for pollinators, birds, and other species that are otherwise unable to reproduce in a more industrial type of agricultural system. I would like to ask the next question to Dr. Paroda. The next question is about access to finance. Access to finance, in a way, kind of depict the perfect storm. You have limited access to finance, particularly for smallholder farmers. Agricultural credit is not accessible to them. Climate change is increasingly affecting yields in a negative way. And at the same time, we have SDG 2 that intends to end hunger by 2030. So on the one hand, we have elements that push against the possibility to achieve the 2030 SDG 2 indicators. The question is, for example, I mean, specifically for India, how maybe smallholder farmers receive greater access to finance, I would say, if you can bring the experience of India, and then more generally, what do you see as positive indicators for achieving the SDG 2 targets?
Well, I do see very important role of agrobiodiversity for our smallholder farmers' sustainability. Especially the UN Food Systems Summit has highlighted the importance of local food systems. And as you also said, in case of our Rome Manifesto, we have to give greater emphasis in terms of using those local species for not only food, but also for good health and immunity against pandemics that we are facing. So in the context, since our smallholder farmers in remote localities and the communities who are sustaining themselves around diverse biodiversity that is existing need to be supported. And to support them, we would require mechanisms and institutions in place which can help not only in evaluating those materials more effectively through global partnership, but also will link them to the market for better livelihood opportunities. And this, in fact, is a challenge. And in that context, what the scientific community can do and provide them opportunities for conserving those genetic resources more effectively and creating required public awareness, and also in the process bring in policy reforms at the national and international level, and a partnership of the kind that is being built through these initiatives of say international conference on agrobiodiversity are very relevant, and we have to learn from our experiences from each other. And in that context, the efforts that are now being made for in situ conservation process to work with the farming communities and ensure that their genetic resources are not only properly evaluated and conserved, but effectively used through access and benefit sharing. And that access and benefit sharing mechanism, whether through TT or through Biodiversity Alliance with CIAT or with the national systems like that of India, China, US and others could come forward to do, will be very, very critical. So I do see that there are opportunities, but certainly we would require to do the business differently, and business as usual will not help.
Thank you, Dr. Paroda. The next question is for Dr. Nadose. Okay, you mentioned that the food system transformation is supported by new technologies and the broader cooperation between all actors, from policymakers to companies and researchers. So what do you see as a bottlenecks to the success of this strategic plan? And what is the role of the international treaty in supporting this multi-stakeholder approach? And maybe I will add a third element to that question. We've been hearing from previous speakers about the importance of traditional knowledge, but also the importance of modern tools and discoveries. How would you bring those two together in an integrated approach?
Thank you very much, Carlo, and thank you to the person that asked this question. For sure, one of the, as I said, Dr. Paroda had mentioned before, one of the elements that the Food System Summit pointed out was the inclusion of local farming systems. But it also pointed out that there is a need for all actors to play the role they're supposed to be in a more cohesive and coordinated manner. That is the only way we can make progress and transform the food system to be able to be sustainable in the long run. One of the bottlenecks has always been the fact that the different systems run in parallel and operate, at different levels and different scales. And then there's also some asymmetry between the different systems, where some of the more formalized systems receive more inputs, more subsidies, more support from the government. The local farming systems did not and do not usually receive sufficient support. So I think they need to balance the support that is given to both systems, or the different systems and different actors in the global food value chain, will certainly improve the situation and help achieve the transformation of the food system that we are all seeking to do. Certainly, there are contributions that the different components or different actors, whether it is in the technology, in the science, in the local communities, researchers, who would have to play in doing this. So it's by facilitating that collaboration and coordination among the different actors that we can do and achieve what we need to do. And the international treaty plays a role in that regard, because it's a platform, in addition to just providing the legal framework for international cooperation, it also provides a platform where the different actors can come together and discuss, and the different countries with different needs and different contexts can also negotiate and include and ensure that that issues of interest and concern for them are taken into account when global frameworks and global rules are being designed and agreed on. Thank you.
Thank you, Kent. As we are now moving towards the end of this session, I would like to ask each of the participants to make a final statement about, particularly still looking at the question that was raised by the people. We all, those sitting here and people participating in the Congress, they believe that in the critical importance of agrobiodiversity for humanity and the planet. But how do we convince those that are not convinced? How do we really make sure that we can make a difference in making this agenda more broadly implemented? Each of you, and then if you want to add the final take-home message, please, that's the chance to do it. I will start from Dr. Mohapatra. Dr. Mohapatra.
Okay, I think that's a very big question. How do we convince, those who are not convinced? And this is what is also essentially required. This needs massive awareness programs globally driven and nationally implemented in consultation and collaboration with each nation, participating nation. The approaches, the programs which are already happening in countries and where there are successes already need to be properly documented and circulated, presented and informed so to everyone so that those become pieces of inspiration for others. Lessons learned from experiences by biodiversity shared, for instance, in many countries, how diversifying diets using biodiversity can be mainstream for addressing malnutrition and similarly addressing climate change. The kind of monoculture we see in many crops because high yielding varieties substituting biodiversity in many regions need to be again highlighted. So there are various aspects, positives with regard to use of agrobiodiversity need to be really done, because that's what we need to really take home a message to every country and then see that there's a greater awareness created. So that's what I would emphasize for future.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohapatra. Dr. Howe?
Okay, thank you. And I want to mention is first we need to use the evidence-based solution to demonstrate the conservation of biodiversity, agricultural biodiversity benefit, and to show the benefits from the practice to convince the biodiversity users. I want to take the sample of China dryland agriculture. So first is using of agrobiodiversity to produce food produce different and very traditional healthy food in diverse production system, such as very traditional millets, soybeans, sorghum, oats, and other, we call it minor crops, within the which is adapt to the local conditions and the climate change and the landscape, like a small scale and multiple farming system. And so we call it organic dryland farming system to produce healthy organic product. And by using the e-commerce to promote the marketing, to sell all this good product to the citizens, the market, so they can get a high benefit from the market through the healthy product sale. So this I want to emphasize is use the evidence-based solution to showcase the benefit and let the use of biodiversity to benefit from the application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. Kent?
Thank you, Carlo. Very, very briefly, I just have two messages and conclusions to make. Given the the broad range of expertise and speakers that we have for this Congress, I think we're certainly looking forward to getting new ideas, new approaches that we can adopt in making sure that agrobiodiversity plays the central role that it needs to in our food systems, ensure its conservation and its use, continuous use. And in that context, I think we need to look at how we can break down that dichotomy between in situ, ex situ conservation approaches, but also the local and the more formalized systems of conservation, where the communities use seed banks, and then we have the more structured gene banks, because they are all part of the same spectrum of conservation of agrobiodiversity that are needed to sustain our food systems and ensure that the diversity that we need for our diet and better nutrition are properly conserved and used as well. So in terms of use as well, I think the one thing we need to acknowledge that I mentioned that before, the disparity between support that's given typically to local farming systems and the more formal farming systems or structured down that receive a lot more support and subsidies from both governments and institutions. And that the role that the local farming systems play in sustaining the diet and nutrition and food security of vast majority of the world population should be recognized and supported. And I think the role that they play should be recognized and really promoted. And hopefully some of the discussions coming out from this Congress find ways that we can utilize and implement these ideas. So I'm looking forward to a very exciting 3 days of discussions and new ideas from the Congress. Thank you very much, Carl.
Thank you, Kent. Dr. Paroda, what are your take-home messages?
Well, in my view, time is ripe for action. And action in terms of using genetic resources more effectively to meet the current challenges, whether it is nutritional security, whether it is diversification in our food basket, or whether it is to take the challenge of climate change. And in that respect, genetic resources do offer much greater opportunities. And we need an aggressive approach for which we would require better institutions in many nations which don't even exist, including even gene banks, and to also provide more funding support, which is not available, and particularly for in situ conservation, and work with the stakeholders so that it is not only the task of one nation or one individual institution, but we need partnership, effective coordination, convergence. And I do see that we need to have much more effective approach for using wild and weedy species for improving our genetic resources, for meeting the current challenges that are of greater relevance for the humanity globally.
Thank you so much. It was really great and a great honor and privilege to be in this moderating such a great panel. I would like to make a few final remarks and then we'll bring this session to a close. I think we have a number of take-home message from this conversation. We've heard a lot about the importance of the indigenous knowledge, the farming communities, and the role as a custodian farmers in conserving this genetic diversity. And I think it's really time to use the words of Dr. Paroda. The time is right for action. We need to make sure, and as Kent mentioned, we need to make sure that their role is recognized. And when I say that, it means that there is really a need for a shift in some policies that really make a role for those communities to become agent of the change. Those communities have a lot of innovation to offer. They have knowledge about how to manage production system in a sustainable way. They have knowledge on the characteristics of those species and varieties that are neglected. And so they need to, they are just not scientific knowledge, but it's a very valuable knowledge that needs to be used in innovative programs. I also think that it's important, though, that we also recognize the benefits of modern technologies. Obviously, genetics, communication technologies, and the many advances in, for example, in remote sensing could be very valuable tool to integrate the traditional knowledge, or the other way around, to really manage in a more efficient way those production systems. And recognizing that if we diversify them, if we create more diversity, and if the production system can mimic better a natural environment, then more species would come. We all know about the damage, the economic damage, for example, of the loss of pollinators. And I think maybe another point that was not discussed in this panel, but I think is somehow very important, is the fact that we don't know the true cost of food. We know that food can produce and can get to the shelves in a very cheap way, but at the end, it's not really cheap because the price is paid by the environment. In the manifesto, it's clearly indicated what are those environmental costs in the current way we produce food. If we can make those costs more transparent, that can create the economic framework under which we can promote and divert incentives towards more sustainable production systems. So in my view, indeed, we have a lot of possibility and a lot of research, as Dr. Howe indicated, to be done. We need to provide those evidence, and there is really a lot of scope. We need to create a coalition of partners. This agrobiodiversity agenda has been high throughout 2021. Of course, there was the